In the early 1930s, long before the world would be set ablaze, Hermann Göring was absolutely convinced that America had no real industrial backbone. In his mind, the United States was a land of consumers, not producers, a land of comfort, not capacity, a place that made razor blades, typewriters, and refrigerators, but certainly nothing capable of sustaining a global war. And to Göring, who saw industry as the engine of victory, this meant that America would be irrelevant in any prolonged conflict. He mocked American manufacturing publicly and privately, claiming it was soft, decentralized, and directionless. He believed the German system, with its strict central planning and forced labor, would always outproduce anything the disorganized Americans could attempt. It was a view rooted in arrogance and in a profound misunderstanding of what American industry actually was. But at that same moment, across the Atlantic, American factories were quietly transforming. Companies that once made cars, radios, and farm equipment were being asked to consider something else, something far bigger, something that no one had ever tried before. The rapid mass production of merchant ships on a scale the world had never imagined. It was a challenge that would have broken older empires. But for the United States, it was an opportunity to unleash a style of manufacturing that no military leader in Europe truly understood. By the late 1930s, tensions were rising worldwide. Germany was rearming. Britain was preparing for the worst. Japan was expanding in the Pacific. And the United States, though still officially neutral, was beginning to feel the pressure of history. Because if war came, someone would have to supply the world. Someone would have to build the ships to carry the fuel, the food, the weapons, and the men. Without ships, there would be no Allied victory. Without ships, even the strongest armies would starve. The problem was that merchant ships took a long time to build. Before the war, it wasn't unusual for a single steel cargo vessel to take 8 months, a year, or even longer. Shipyards moved slowly. Construction was done largely by hand, and no one had ever attempted mass production in the shipbuilding world. Ships, unlike cars, were enormous. Unlike airplanes, they required massive numbers of welders, riveters, pipe fitters, and carpenters. They were built outdoors, exposed to the weather, and dependent on specialized crews that took years to train. But in 1940, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent an urgent message to the United States. Britain was being starved by German U-boats. The Atlantic supply line was collapsing. Food, fuel, ammunition, everything was running dangerously low. The Royal Navy was stretched thin, and the merchant fleet was sinking faster than it could be replaced. Without help, Britain would fall. Franklin Roosevelt understood immediately what was needed. Ships, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. He turned to American industry and demanded something unprecedented: a massive fleet of simple, rugged cargo vessels built in record time. Ships that could be built quickly, repaired easily, and produced in unimaginable quantities. These ships would become known as Liberty ships, and their impact would reshape the war. But the idea sounded insane. To every naval architect, ship captain, and industrial planner in America, the proposal seemed impossible. The shipyards weren't big enough, there weren't enough workers, the materials were limited, and the concept of building ships like automobiles, using assembly line techniques, was considered a fantasy. Yet one man believed it could be done: Henry J. Kaiser. Kaiser wasn't a shipbuilder. He wasn't even from the maritime world. He was a construction magnate known for building roads, dams, and massive public works. But he possessed something that German leadership lacked: imagination. While Göring mocked America's industrial capacity, Kaiser saw what it could truly become when pushed to its limits. He studied the problem with a construction worker's practicality. Ships, he reasoned, were just large structures, and large structures could be broken down into smaller parts. If a dam could be built from thousands of prefabricated components, why not a ship? If roads could be built in parallel sections and joined together, why not hull plates? If the construction industry could train thousands of new workers quickly, why couldn't shipyards? The idea was revolutionary. Prefabricated shipbuilding. Instead of building vessels piece by piece on the slipway, entire sections would be assembled off-site, indoors, in controlled environments. Workers who had never seen a ship before, women, young men, retirees, would be trained in welding, cutting, and riveting. Parts would then be transported by cranes and fitted like giant pieces of a puzzle. This approach eliminated bottlenecks. Steel plates could be welded simultaneously in multiple workshops. Deck houses, engine rooms, and masts could be assembled separately and installed in days rather than months. Even the engines were mass-produced by automobile factories. When Kaiser presented the idea to the U.S. Maritime Commission, the reaction was mixed. Some thought he was a visionary. Others believed he was delusional. But with the world collapsing and Britain running out of ships, the United States had no choice but to take the gamble. And so the first Liberty ship program was approved. When construction began, German intelligence was confused. Their spies reported that America was planning to build thousands of ships. Göring laughed when he first read the reports. To him, the Americans were making wild promises. Germany's war machine, after all, had mastered industrial production under a tightly controlled system. But the United States was a chaotic capitalist nation with too many companies competing against each other, too many unions, too many regional differences. Göring was convinced they would fail. But Kaiser's shipyards began to rise with astonishing speed. Massive cranes that looked like skyscrapers loomed over the water. New facilities appeared almost overnight. Tens of thousands of workers poured in. Farmers, mechanics, housewives, teachers, students. None of them trained, all of them determined. Women in overalls and welding masks became icons of the home front war effort. Retired craftsmen trained younger workers. Whole neighborhoods formed around the shipyards. Cafeterias, first aid centers, daycares, transportation hubs, everything was engineered to support constant, uninterrupted production. The first Liberty ship took far longer than expected. It was slow, difficult, and riddled with mistakes. German intelligence smirked. Göring was delighted. He said again that Americans were incapable of serious industrial focus. But what he didn't understand was the American learning curve. Once a system was refined, once workers were trained, once bottlenecks were eliminated, production didn't just improve. It exploded. Within months, the shipyards were working at a pace that stunned the world. A ship that once took 230 days to build could now be completed in 40, then 30, then 20, then 10. The record would eventually drop to 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. A number so absurd that Göring refused to believe it. By late 1942, Liberty ships were rolling off assembly lines at such speed that even the German Navy couldn't keep up. U-boats sank dozens, but hundreds more were already on the way. Convoys that once sailed with fear now sailed with confidence. Supplies began reaching Britain and the Soviet Union in staggering quantities. And with every ship launched, Göring's joke about razor blades looked more ridiculous. Because these weren't razor blades. They were the backbone of the Allied supply chain. Floating arteries of victory. Symbols of a nation that had embraced mass production with a ferocity no dictator could match. By 1943, the truth was undeniable. American industrial power, once mocked by Göring, was overwhelming the Axis. Liberty ships were being built faster than the German Navy could sink them. They were supplying every front, every army, every convoy. They were the reason the Allies did not collapse. Factories in Detroit, Chicago, Portland, Baltimore, and Richmond were operating around the clock. The United States wasn't just building ships, It was building jeeps, tanks, planes, ammunition, and fuel at rates that shattered every pre-war expectation. The arsenal of democracy was no longer a slogan. It was a reality of steel, sweat, and scale. And Göring, who once laughed at the American worker, now faced a terrifying truth. The United States could outproduce Germany 10-1. It didn't matter how advanced the German weapons were. It didn't matter how disciplined their troops were. No army could survive against a nation capable of producing victory in the millions. By the end of 1944, the United States had built 2,710 Liberty ships, each one a testament to a system Göring claimed could never work. These ships carried the supplies that fed armies, armed allies, and kept entire nations alive. They delivered fuel to the front lines, tanks to Normandy, aircraft to Britain, and food to starving populations across the world. The American worker, once dismissed as soft, had proven to be the most adaptable, determined, and efficient industrial force on the planet. And Kaiser's shipyards, once doubted by everyone, had changed the course of the war. Göring never publicly admitted he was wrong. But privately, German officers understood exactly what had happened. They had underestimated the United States. They had underestimated its people, its factories, and its will. They had underestimated a style of production that valued innovation over hierarchy, flexibility over rigidity, and speed over perfection. The Liberty ships were not elegant, they were not beautiful, they were not fast, but they were built with a purpose, and that purpose was victory. Their steel hulls carried the fate of nations, their engines powered the Allied cause, and their sheer numbers crushed the dreams of the Axis. America had proven that mass production could win a global war. The world had never seen anything like it, and has never seen anything like it since. And the man who once laughed at American industry would eventually discover the ultimate irony. The razor-blade nation had cut the Axis war machine to pieces. As 1944 turned into 1945, the American Liberty ship program was no longer just an industrial project. It had become one of the most powerful symbols of the entire Allied war effort. These vessels were now the lifeline of a global struggle. They fed Britain, supplied the Soviet Union, sustained operations in North Africa, equipped armies in Italy, supported the invasion of France, and carried material to the Pacific. They were everywhere, crossing oceans day and night, forming convoys that stretched from horizon to horizon. But behind every Liberty ship was something far more important than steel or engines. It was the mindset that built them, a mindset Germany had never understood, a mindset rooted in problem-solving, teamwork, decentralization, and a culture of innovation that dictatorships simply could not match. Göring and the Nazi leadership believed that fear was the greatest motivator. But American industry was powered by something else entirely: confidence, creativity, and the belief that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when given the tools and freedom to do it. In German factories, workers lived under strict, punishing conditions. Every mistake brought consequences. Every delay risked punishment. Every task was dictated from above. There was no room for innovation, no tolerance for improvisation, no incentive to improve the process. Workers simply followed orders. But in America, workers were encouraged to think, innovate, experiment, and improve. If a welder found a faster technique, the entire yard adopted it within days. If a machinist redesigned a jig or tool, production improved immediately. If a foreman reorganized crews for better efficiency, no one stopped him. This culture of freedom blended with massive resources and a national determination to stop tyranny created results that stunned even American leaders. By late 1944, Liberty shipyards were no longer just productive. They were almost unstoppable. The pace of construction had become a well-coordinated symphony of welding torches, steel plates, cranes, forklifts, generators, and thousands of workers moving in harmony. A hull section might be built in the morning, craned into place by noon, and fully welded by nightfall. Each ship was the work of 250,000 individual welds, yet the crews made it look effortless. German intelligence, still reporting to Göring, struggled to explain what they were seeing. They sabotaged nothing. They disrupted nothing. They merely watched in confusion as the United States outproduced the Axis at a scale that defied every calculation. They had believed that industrial output was limited by the number of skilled workers, and America had proven that unskilled workers could be trained so quickly that within weeks they were welding at professional levels. The German High Command eventually realized the truth. American workers were not hindered by ideology. They were empowered by opportunity. Meanwhile, far across the Atlantic, the impact of this production was being felt on the battlefield. During the build-up to the D-Day invasion, Liberty ships became the unsung heroes of the Allied plan. Without them, the vast quantities of fuel, ammunition, landing craft, vehicles, and men needed for the invasion could never have reached Britain. For months, these ships streamed into British ports, carrying millions of tons of material. Every jeep that drove onto Omaha Beach, every tank rolling toward Caen, every crate of ammunition opened by American soldiers had crossed the ocean aboard a Liberty ship. German commanders noticed it immediately. Their attempts to starve Britain and strangle Allied supply lines were collapsing. U-boats were sinking ships, but not fast enough. Every Liberty ship lost was replaced by 2 more. The mathematics of war, the cold, unforgiving arithmetic of production, was turning against the Third Reich. And still, the United States accelerated production. By early 1945, the Allies had more merchant shipping than they could use. Supplies were stacking faster than they could be delivered. Ports struggled to unload everything. Convoys grew so large that German submarines avoided them entirely. The Liberty ship had become a weapon simply by existing in overwhelming numbers. Even after Germany's defeat became inevitable, Kaiser's shipyards kept producing. They built ships faster than the military could assign missions. Some Liberty ships were completed and immediately placed into reserve because there were literally more ships than the war could consume. This was the final proof of American industrial supremacy. A supremacy Göring had once dismissed as laughable. Meanwhile, inside Germany, factories were collapsing. Fuel shortages crippled production. Allied bombing flattened industrial centers. Skilled workers were drafted into the army. Forced labor filled the gaps, but lacked skill and loyalty. The German war machine, once feared for its efficiency, slowed to a painful crawl. Producing a single tank became a struggle. Aircraft engines failed from poor quality materials. Ammunition ran low. Supply trucks broke down because replacement parts no longer existed. In contrast, America built more trucks, jeeps, planes, and ships than any army could ever need. It built so many Liberty ships that over 100 survived long after the war, carrying cargo into the 1970s and even 1980s. Some countries bought them at scrap value and used them for decades. But behind the staggering numbers lies an even more remarkable truth. America didn't win because it had factories. It won because it had people who believed in the mission, men and women who worked night shifts in freezing rain, mothers who welded steel instead of staying home, young men who shaped the frames that carried armies, retirees who trained new workers. All of them together built the arsenal of democracy. And while they labored, Göring kept mocking. His speeches insisted that German engineering was superior. He bragged that German craftsmanship was unmatched. He insisted that America's inferior consumer culture could never produce real war machines. But by 1945, these claims were no longer propaganda. They were delusions. The truth was simple. America didn't need perfect craftsmanship. It needed speed, volume, quantity, the ability to overwhelm the Axis with resources so vast that resistance became futile. That was what Liberty ships represented. If a vessel lasted only 5 years, that was enough. If a ship made just 3 voyages before being sunk, that was enough. If a convoy lost 10 ships but arrived with 60, that was enough. The Liberty ship wasn't about elegance, it was about overwhelming force. And through this overwhelming force, America achieved something unprecedented. It built 2,710 Liberty ships in less than 5 years. A number so vast, so staggering that historians still struggle to comprehend it. To this day, no nation has built merchant vessels at this speed or scale. The ships themselves were far from perfect. Some hulls cracked, some engines failed, some welds needed repairs, but none of it mattered. They sailed anyway. They delivered anyway. They kept moving forward across oceans filled with submarines and storms. Every voyage kept armies alive. Every shipment pushed the Axis closer to defeat. By the time the war ended, even German officers admitted they had underestimated America. They were stunned by how quickly the United States converted its industries into war production. Stunned by how ordinary workers became experts in months. Stunned by instruments of liberation, how millions of workers, united by purpose, built the fleet that would feed the world, arm the Allies, and crush the Axis. They proved that industry, when driven by freedom and determination, can shape history. They proved Hermann Göring wrong in the most spectacular way possible, and they ensured that the United States would be remembered not as a nation of razor blades, but as the nation that built a fleet of 2,710 Liberty ships, one of the greatest industrial achievements in human history.